see you again.
Good to see you too.
We're super excited to hear what you've got to share with us tonight. I understand that you have some slides.
I do, and I can
We'll
share them.
let you go ahead and set up the sharing for that. And you guys are going to want to pay really close attention to what she's going to be talking about here. She's an adjunct professor at the University of New Hampshire School of Law, and she teaches tokenomics and cryptocurrency regulations in smart cities, blockchain law, and government. She's smarter than both of us put together. Maureen, go ahead and take it away.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Maureen Murat. I'm with Crowdy Advisors. So today we'll be talking about the CARES Act, and I just wanted to share some highlights with you about what small businesses and consultants should be considering when thinking about potentially using some or taking advantage of some of the relief that the government has provided. So first, I am an attorney as well, and so I have to give my little disclaimer. And so essentially what I'm providing to you today is just for informational purposes only. And so it's not intended to be used for any legal or financial advice. If this is something that you think that you would want to take advantage of, then I do suggest and I urge you to speak to someone who can help you in your area. Okay, before you make any major decisions. So first, the CARES Act. So the CARES Act is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, right? It's a pretty long name, but it was passed by Congress and signed into law by the president on March 27th. And essentially the goal of the CARES Act was to provide fast and direct economic assistance for workers, families, small businesses, and to also try to preserve as many jobs as possible for the different industries in our country. And so I know a lot of you have heard about what has gone on in the news. There was already one wave and ran out, and I think in less than 2 weeks. And so now the new wave, or the second wave, I should say, started, and the application period opened again yesterday at 10:30 in the morning. So, if you were contemplating it, this might be the time to really get your ducks in a row and think about if this is something you want to do, because, just like the first round, it's not expected to last till June, which is the when the application period ends. So the main portion of the CARES Act that I'll be touching on today is about the Paycheck Protection Program. And so the Paycheck Protection Program essentially expands the SBA 78A small business loan program. And originally it was meant for disasters, but they've decided to increase or expand it so that people could also use it for payroll costs and other business expenses as well, and because of the pandemic. So who can apply? Businesses with less than 500 employees can apply, or businesses that meet the SBA, the Small Business Administration's small business standards. And then we also have nonprofits, 501c3s that are in the organizations, and tribal businesses can also apply for this program. And so can sole proprietors, independent contractors, also known as consultants, and self-employed people. They also can apply to receive a loan from this program. So the PPP is what they're calling it, the Paycheck Protection Program. It funds, you can use it for a number of things. I know I already mentioned payroll and all of that, but you can also use the PPP funds for payments on your mortgage obligations, not your personal, obviously. If your company has a mortgage, or it's paying rent, or it's incurring any debt, or has incurred any debt and needs to make debt payments. It will also cover utilities payments that the business has to make, as well as any interest on any debt obligation. So sometimes people are renting equipment, sometimes people have credit card debt, and things like that, or the business, I should say. And so for those reasons, you could also use the PPP funds to be able to essentially alleviate some of the hardship that your business may be experiencing as a result of the pandemic and maybe business slowing down or doors having to close, et cetera. But the main reason for the PPP is to preserve the amount of I'm sorry, not preserve. The main reason for the PPP is so that you can keep your employees, right? And so that you can pay them to hold on to them until this is all over and the world opens up again, and then we can hopefully go back to, I guess I won't say normal, but go back to something that you can control. So I did mention that I'm sorry, I went too fast. I did mention that the PPP also, in addition to the payroll and all these expenses, I know that there are small businesses that may not have some of these expenses. And so if that's the case, then that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't apply for the PPP. You just have to go through the application, and I'll share the link with you later so that you can determine what certain things that you might be able to do. Because even if you are a small business, if you're, let's say, someone who's a service provider and it's just you, so maybe instead of trying to provide, pay stubs and payroll and all of that, maybe you could consider yourself to be maybe a sole proprietor, or not a sole proprietor, a consultant, or a someone who doesn't necessarily have all the employees and all that, and you could still possibly apply. So that brings me to independent contractors, sole proprietors, and self-employed. So those folks, if you are thinking of applying, so let's say you have a business, but you're not necessarily registered, you don't have employees, you don't have a mortgage, you're not paying rent somewhere, but you are in business for yourself, then you too can apply. And these are some of the things that you might need. So payroll, tax filings, any 1099s, if you've provided service to let's say you spoke at a conference or you were a consultant on some project and they gave you a 1099 showing the amount that you made, that's something you can use. Any other income that you can show via your bank statements or something like that, you can use that, as well as any expenses you have for your business. And so those will help the lenders be able to create a profile for you so that they can determine if you are someone that would be eligible for this benefit, to be able to borrow these funds. And the other thing I want to mention about sole proprietors and independent contractors, if you're not at the point where you can do this yet and you don't have these documents, this is the time to start getting that together and keeping it current and not necessarily waiting till tax time. So that's just a suggestion of mine. I think it makes tax time very easy if you have some of your ducks in a row already. So in terms of the loan payment terms for the PPP, you are able to get this loan at a very low rate, right? There's nowhere that you can get a business loan for 4% and lower. And this is, so SBA essentially is saying we are guaranteeing these loans, and because we're guaranteeing them, and so that means if you default, the government will still pay it. The interest rate can't be high. There's also not going to be a prepayment penalty if the business is able to pay that loan back quickly. There's also not going to be any personal guarantees, and there are some instances when banks do have owners of small businesses provide a personal guarantee. So there's none of that in the PPP program. There are no fees required. And on top of that, the lenders are required to provide you, the small business, with payment deferral for 6 to 12 months if you should need it. And that would include principal, interest, and fees. So that's essentially your whole payment. Generally, your payment would include the principal, a payment towards the principal, and a payment towards interest. And then this program, if you are at the point where you do borrow the funds, but you're not able to start making payments right away, then the government is saying, okay, fine, then those lenders have to allow you a deferral period so that you can make those payments. The other benefit, or highlight, I should say, about the PPP program is the ability to have that loan forgiven. So a portion of that loan may be forgiven, but it's limited to certain circumstances. So we mentioned earlier what types of expenses you can use the funds for. So that's where the limit is. If you're going to have those funds, what's the word, forgiven, then you have to make sure that those funds went towards payroll costs, went towards rent, mortgage interest, or utilities. And, you know, they're, you know, and the, the perception of the government is that most of those funds will actually go towards payroll, like I said, because that's the main reason for this program, to allow businesses, small businesses, to be able to hold on to their employees as much as possible. And so the other thing that I want to mention is that even though loans may be forgiven, the amount that would be forgiven would not exceed the principal amount. So that means that if you owe more because of the interest, and so let's say you hadn't been able to make payments on that loan for 6 to 12 months right away. So then that means that you would essentially owe a little bit more than your loan because of the interest, but the amount that would be forgiven would only be for the interest. And because it would be as a result of it being forgiven, then that means the loan is also considered, once it's forgiven, it's considered a canceled debt, which is also, you know, a plus. And then, so the caveat to this is that any portion of that loan that is not forgiven by before December 31st, 2020, then the borrower, the small business, has a repayment term of up to 10 years from the date that you applied for the loan forgiveness. So there are all these layers to it, right? So if it doesn't work out, if you're able to pay the loan right away, then you should, right? And then if you're not able to, you get a 6 to 12 month deferment until you're able to. You can also ask for a loan forgiveness. And then if for some reason the loan is not forgiven before the December 31st, then of 2020, then you have up to 10 years to repay that loan, which is something to also consider. Maximum loan amount. So there's a lot of talk about how much can you borrow. So I think most news outlets are just talking about the $10 million that you can borrow up to 10 million, which is true, but there are other factors that come into play. And so it's the lesser of one of these three categories, either 10 million or the average total monthly payments for payroll costs that you incur by 2.5, right? And then, or if let's say that for the second tier, it's because you were in business from January 1st. But let's say you weren't in business from January 1st, then it's still the total, the average of the total payments for the payroll costs, but it would be, through that short period between January 1st and January 1st and February 29th times the 2.5, and then that would be your loan amount. So it's not to say that if you need to borrow money, then your first or only option is to ask for 10 million. There are equations, you'd have to fall under one of these things. So it's the lesser of one of these three. So I want to make sure that is, something that should be, that is highlighted. The other thing is in terms of employees, I forgot to mention this about payroll costs. So for the purposes of this loan, employees are full-time, part-time, or other schedules. And so other would potentially be people who work seasonally, right? So they don't work all year round, but they essentially come in every summer or every spring or during the holidays, and they work a normal shift. But it does include part-time employees as well. So like, again, I know I keep saying this, but the main thing is to be able to help, assist your employees so that they can stay on as long as possible. Another highlight I wanted to share is the emergency grant. So with the emergency grant, you're also, this is a $10,000 grant that parties can get within a 3-day period. I know there might be some of you out there who already applied for it and didn't get it within 3 days, but I know that, we have to be patient. This is new, things are rolling out, there are a lot of things going on. And so it didn't quite go as quickly as as expected or as anticipated. But essentially the emergency grant was to kind of serve as like a stopgap measure. So you could get the $10,000 and then you would essentially get that $10,000 in advance of getting the PPP loan, because that would kind of serve as a wait, like I said, a stopgap measure as you waited for your decision from your lender or whomever to your lender or other company that would be loaning you the whatever the funds were that you were trying to qualify for. And so with the $10,000, you know, you would receive it within 3 days, and those funds would then have to be used for certain things, right? Paid sick leave for your employees, maintaining payroll, as I've said a few times, meeting any increased costs your business might have because of the pandemic. And then, you know, again, making rent or mortgage payments and also repaying any obligations. So one of the caveat to getting the emergency grant is, granted, it is a grant, so you don't have to pay it back. So that means if you are not later approved for a PPP loan, then you don't have to pay the $10,000 back. But if you are approved for the PPP loan, then the loan would be reduced by the $10,000 advance that you got. And technically the $10,000 grant is part of a different SBA program. It's the economic injury loss program. But because of, you know, they know that one, $10,000 may not be enough for a small business. And the fact that, you know, you could possibly be applying for a PPP loan, or maybe you applied for a different loan before the PPP became available. That's another option, right? You could apply for something else that might not fall within the PPP realm. Or let's say you apply for a loan before, another type of loan, an economic injury loan, and then you decide you want to do a PPP loan. Then that loan is essentially an obligation. So that loan, the first loan that you got from SBA, may be refinanced, right, within your new loan under the PPP program. So that's one. And then the $10,000 is under the economic injury program. But like I said, even though it's under a different program, for purposes of forgiving it or maybe having a PPP loan approved and then being able to you know, reduce whatever the amount of your PPP loan was by the amount that you received from the emergency grant. Hopefully that makes sense. So there are a number of entities or banks, financial institutions that can provide, that are SBA approved. So they have gone through an application process with the SBA, and they are able to lend funds that are guaranteed by the government. So first, I would say there's a link there at the top. First, I would say to apply through an existing SBA 788 lender. Many times these are actually institutions that you probably already bank with. So some of the large ones are, you know, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and all that. And then, or a credit union, which might also be able to do that. But what has happened recently, actually before the second wave that started yesterday, is that there are now fintech companies that are SBA approved to be PPP lenders. Some of them have their restrictions, right? So like PayPal, and even some of the banks, they require you to have a bank account with them already. But there are some that don't require. So I have a list here of the ones that don't necessarily require you to have an account with them or to be an existing customer for you to be able to borrow the funds. And what's good about this is because even though even though these fintech companies aren't traditional banks and they don't have FDIC insurance, et cetera, what gives them confidence that they can lend these funds is because these funds are actually backed by the government. So again, you know, loan forgiveness program is pretty lenient, even though I couldn't say that it's 100% that everyone who asks for loan forgiveness will get it, but it's pretty lenient given the circumstances. And the other thing is, because it's lenient, the government will back it. So whatever funds go out, the government will repay those funds. So that's something else to consider. There are also other fintech companies that are partnering with banks to provide loans. So, and they are not on this list. So I really urge you to go online and check those out, because you know, as we've seen online, there are many of these different companies that are, or the banks, the larger banks, you know, they're either very restrictive about who they're lending to, and they are, you know, depending on how much they're willing to lend, they're running out, and so they're not accepting applications. So it's best to also look to see what other fintech companies might be, you know, offering these programs. So I know the topic was mainly about the CARES Act, but if for some reason you're not able to get a loan through under the CARES Act, or you don't, because you don't quite fit into these different categories, I really encourage people to look for other resources in your areas. There are many states that have also created programs to provide loans for small businesses and grants. There are traditional funds that have created programs to help with the gap in financing. There are other companies who are raising money just so that they could help small businesses in your area. So I really urge you to not only think that if you can't get funds through the CARES Act or under the CARES Act, then there's no other way. There's always another way. So that's all. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's all I got. I know I kind of rushed through that, but hopefully.
Well, fortunately,
it all made sense.
Fortunately, this is, you know, documented forever on the internet, and people can go back through it and, you know, push pause and look at the slides and listen to what you're saying, so they make sure they go about this correctly. So thank you, Maureen. This is really, really great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to see y'all again, and have a good evening.
Excellent.
Great stuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
So do I just leave, or you knock me out, or not?
Boot you out, or you can leave on your own accord.
I would never knock you out.
Okay. I mean, I didn't mean to say it that way, but you know, so I can just leave.
Maureen
right?
said knock you out.
Yeah. There's the door, but you know, be careful.
All right.
Thanks, Maureen.
All right, bye. Have a
Great
good
stuff.
one.
Thank you.
Thanks.